My guest is a homeschool pioneer in multiple different ways. She began homeschooling in 1983 as a widow with 2 children, got arrested for homeschooling, has homeschooled her 3 children over 28 years, and started a successful homeschool co-op that is still going strong after 25 years. I have also known her my whole life. I'm excited to welcome today my Aunt Kari Davidson to the show. My guest is a homeschool pioneer in multiple different ways. She began homeschooling in 1983 as a widow with 2 children, got arrested for homeschooling, has homeschooled her 3 children over 28 years, and started a successful homeschool co-op that is still going strong after 25 years. I have also known her my whole life. I'm excited to welcome today my Aunt Kari Davidson to the show. Welcome.
It's good to be here. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I think everybody's going to really enjoy your story because there are a lot of aspects to it that are entertaining, but also very encouraging. And so that's why I want you to share your story. So let's start with the fact that you are one of the homeschool pioneers from the 1980s. And you started that journey as a widow. So can you tell us a little bit about why? What got you into homeschooling in what seems like an impossible situation?
Well, honestly, I really felt like the Lord called me. And the way that it happened, my oldest son had just started kindergarten. So he was in kindergarten that year. And I had a business, nursery and landscaping. And a woman came out to my business and just started visiting with me. Her name was Candy Gaston. And she said she came because she saw uh, our Christian emblem in our billboard. And so anyway, I know the Lord led her. She just started talking about homeschooling. And when I heard it, it was one of those things that you just know that you know that you know in the depths of your heart, I'm supposed to do this. And I was so excited about it. I had never heard of homeschooling before. And so we just started making arrangements to get together, and over about a 5-month period, I got to know her and her husband and her 2 oldest children, and they would come to my house, and I decided to do it. And she had like a little training session that summer, and then during that time, I talked to my sister, your mother, and her husband, and told them all about it, and they were just as excited as I was. So us and another set or two of friends joined, and we had a little training session that summer to kind of learn about different things with homeschool. And we started in September of 1983.
Yeah, I remember that I was 11 when we started homeschooling. So you had 2 children at the time. And then in our family, there was me and my sister. And it was a really, really small town. So
Yes.
it wasn't long before the whole town knew that there were some kids not going to school. But before we get to the next part, I just want to say this was a time when there was very few curriculum options available. There were not co-ops. We'd never heard of such a thing before. And so we used the ACE curriculum. And I know you were taught the same way mom and daddy were taught, a very structured homeschool routine with, start time early in the morning. We had a little desk. We put a flag up if we needed help. We were taught how
If
to,
you needed to go to the restroom, they
yes,
put the little flag up.
it
Yeah,
was
if you
like a
needed
little
help. Yeah.
classroom.
It was pretty organized like an institution. But to be honest, I think I needed that to start out because I was quite a free spirit, aka rebel, and never really followed rules or instruction or had much structure in my life. That was a blessing for me
Mhm.
to just get us started. Once you get into the routine, then you begin to see where you can have areas of freedom, which we did take advantage of with time.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was very strict that way. But I loved it. I did. I just loved it.
I did too. I was one of the kids and I loved it. And even when I started homeschooling my first daughter, I did the same thing. I started with a classroom-like structure, even though, our homeschool had evolved over the years. When I started as the mom, there was a lot of security in a very structured school classroom style thing. I had the bulletin board decorations and everything, but it just felt safe. And then over time, like you said, you learn to relax here and there.
Yeah, and those things like we did, those are fun
Hmm.
for like kindergartners, first grade, because they get the stickers.
Yeah.
I don't know, they have those routines. So really, for the little ones especially,
Mhm.
it's fun.
We started in 1983, and it didn't take long for trouble to come along. Early in that very first homeschool year, you were arrested for homeschooling along with my mom and dad. So, why don't you tell us that story?
So, as you had mentioned, the town was very small. I think they had about 400 or 500 people in it. So everyone did know everyone. And I had moved there from Dallas. So I was like the new person. So everyone knew who I was, you know. And before my husband had died, everyone knew him. His family had been part of that area for years. So I'm sure I was watched, so to speak. Not, I don't mean that in a negative way, like Gestapo, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's such a small town, people know what you're doing. And I remember being in our little bitty grocery store there in town, standing in line, and women in front of me speaking so that I could hear them talked about how terrible it is that people will not put their kids in school and just started saying things like that. And I had my kids with me, and I guess I was just so shocked because I've always been the kind of person that, you know, live your life, you know. I mean, I may not agree with your choice, but I don't care what you do, you
Mhm.
know. And so I was surprised that it upset people that I was doing this, but I knew what I was doing and why I was doing it. And so no one was going to change my mind. I did get a letter. I believe it was at the 1st of October, and it just said I was in violation of the Oklahoma truancy laws, and I needed to have my children in school within 30 days. And the law for Oklahoma, and I think it's still the same today,
Mhm.
is very conducive to homeschooling. Basically, your child needs to be in some sort of education by the time their birthday. I think they have to be 7 by
Mhm.
September. So the year that they're 7 by September in some kind of school, private or public, and homeschool is considered private in Oklahoma, but it was just not heard of. So my son, he was 6 when we started, and my daughter was 4. So neither one of them even fell into that list. So I just totally ignored the letter. I thought, number one, it's not illegal. And number two, my children aren't truant, you know, because they're
Mhm.
not old enough to be. So I didn't pay any attention. Nikki, your parents had gotten a letter too, I'm pretty sure. And so anyway, the next thing I know is I get a knock at my door. I believe it was in early November or late October. And it was a policeman, said he had come to arrest me. And I was so surprised. And so I went and got my Bible and a sweater and a toothbrush. And I said, you know, I've got kids here, you know, what do I do? And so I did not have a telephone in my home at the time. And of course, there weren't cell phones. But I was informed by the police officer that that another set of policemen had already gone to my sister's home to arrest them, and they told them that I don't have a telephone and they're going to contact my pastor to have him come get all the children. So
Mhm.
they told me, your pastor will be here in a little bit to get your children. And they were very kind to wait on me until they arrested me.
Weren't they
So,
friends? I mean,
huh?
you knew these police officers personally, didn't you?
I did not know the police
Oh, you
officers.
didn't
Now,
know this one?
your dad, I'm sure, did because he
Mhm.
worked for the
He
sheriff's
worked for the
department.
sheriff's office at the
Yeah.
time.
So, and he was from that area, but no, I didn't know them anyway. So they let my pastor take all of the children to his wife, to his home. His wife took care of them. And then the pastor was allowed to drive my sister and her husband and myself to the police station in Waurika. So we were booked in there and then taken before the judge for an arraignment. By the time we were taken to the judge, our pastor had come in and paid our bill so that we could go home. And so that started about a 3 month long ordeal for, you know, we didn't know what was coming.
Mhm.
But I can say without a doubt, and I think I can say it for your parents, it never crossed my mind to not homeschool. It was
Mhm.
just like, they're wrong, and this is what God has called me to do.
Mhm.
And I guess we're going to see how God's going to work this out. And so Debbie and Andy had joined some kind of homeschool legal group and paid a fee that if you ever have problems, they'll come to your aid. So they contacted their people. I didn't have anyone. I had not been able to afford to do that at that time. So somehow word got out, and I still don't know. It's just the Lord. It amazes me. But Michael Ferris, who at the time was Beverly LaHaye's lawyer for Concerned Women for America, he is also the one that started the Homeschool Legal Defense and started Patrick Henry College for
Mm-hmm.
homeschoolers up in Virginia. He heard about our situation and called the pastor's wife. Again, how he got her number, I do not know, but he told her, we are on this. We are aware of it. You tell them not to worry. And she told them I didn't have a telephone. He said, tell Carrie she needs to get a telephone in her house. And somebody, probably the church, paid for me to get a telephone. That makes me want to cry. I mean, that's just how broke I was, at that
Mm-hmm.
time in my life. And so I got a telephone hung up, put on my wall. I was so proud of it. And Michael Ferris's organization contacted a man named John Eidsmoe. He's known as Colonel John Eidsmoe. At the time, he was the professor of law at ORU. And he said he would take my case, and he met me by phone to start with and told me he didn't want to charge me anything because I was a widow. And that was just huge in my
Mm-hmm.
life. And so he interviewed me, and I did not have a pristine background or anything. And he said, well, we'll tell him you have, this education or that ability. And so you should be able to do this. And so when he asked me questions, I said, well, I had not graduated from high school. In fact, I had been kicked out of all the schools in the Dallas School District and the Richardson, Texas School District. And this was all before I was a Christian, just FYI. And so he was like, okay, well, we're not going to go that route. He said, I don't think that'll help you. But I had shared my testimony with him, so he knew I became a Christian at 20 and my life had completely turned around. So he had much confidence in this was all going to be okay. So he and Andy and Debbie's lawyers invited us to meet in Dallas at Kirk and Beverly McCord's home in Dallas. All the lawyers were going to convene there. And for old timers, old homeschoolers, you will know Kirk and Beverly McCord's name because they are the ones that hosted and put on the whole big, what was it, the Homeschool Book
Homeschool book
Fair
fair. Mm-hmm.
in
Texas.
Arlington every year. And they were both lawyers, but they were homeschoolers. And so they let us use their home for this meeting. And the lawyers interviewed all the kids independently, which you might remember
I do.
what to ask you, and just verified everything, got all of their ducks in a row, and just said, we'll wait. And so I believe that was in December. That meeting was in December. And we knew that the court trial was scheduled for January or February. They weren't sure at the time. So in January, we knew that, it would be coming close. And again, there weren't that many people at the time, and I didn't even know anyone in Oklahoma homeschool besides our little group of four. And I got a phone call one day, and it was from a woman I did not know. I don't know how she got my number. And she just said, I want you to know there's a lot of us, and we're going to be on the courthouse steps when you go to court. And I said, who are you? And she said, we're homeschoolers up here in Duncan. She said, there's about 200 or 300 of us. And I was like, what? I can't believe it. And so
Yeah.
I was just so excited. And then it was the week of court. It might have been the day before, but it was definitely the week of. We got a phone call that the school had dropped all charges and there was not going to be a court case. And we were victorious. We could homeschool all we wanted to. And it was just awesome. My heart's pounding fast just thinking about it
Mm-hmm.
because I just remember the whole ordeal and the emotions of it. And it was awesome. It was awesome to see the mighty hand of God working for his people. And that's what he did. And so we continued homeschooling after that.
So yeah, that to me is one of the things that I wish more people, new homeschoolers, understood is how how much freedom they have now, but also how valuable that freedom is. And, you know, a young widow with two small children, no money, no telephone, was basically being charged with something that she hadn't done just for following this conviction, and how scary it was. We don't face that anymore. We don't have that fear, but it's because of all of the pioneers who went ahead and risked that in the early days, that, you know, the freedom that we have now has been won in every single state in America.
Yeah. So back then, there was a saying, this was in the early 80s, you either homeschool with conviction or for preference. And if you were homeschooling for preference, just because you knew it was better for your kids or, you know, whatever reason, then you knew that if trouble came, you'd go ahead and put your kids in school. If you were homeschooling for conviction, it was do or die. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
do it because you believe the Lord called you. And so there were a lot of people back in those days that were homeschooling with conviction.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that because, like you said, we take advantage of our freedom. We don't realize the price that was paid, not just from us, but going back to the founding of our country for
Mm-hmm.
us to have these freedoms. And so I think we don't use it like we should. And so the advantages and the blessings that our children should have, we're not really maybe relaying that as much as we should,
Mm-hmm.
so that they understand the awesome position that they are in and the
Yeah,
torch that they are carrying, that they want to be ready to pass on to future generations. It's a big deal.
it is a big deal. So after the arrest, were you ever afraid of a knock on the door happening again?
I, I don't know if I was afraid of a knock on the door, but I was very cautious from then on. I didn't go out during the daytime. And it was the very next year, I believe, I moved to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So now Texas was a whole different ball game at that time.
It was
And they
still illegal.
were, yes, it was still illegal. They were arresting people. So there were several years where we did not go outside if
Mm-hmm.
it was school hours, quote unquote school hours. We didn't go to the store. We just didn't do it because you didn't want people to see you out and about and
Mm-hmm.
automatically assume, hey, their kids aren't in school, you know, because immediately people think their kids aren't in school. They're not doing anything, not realizing that my kids get recess and breaks just
Yeah.
like public school kids do. So I would say that even after it became legal, I realized, I guess it was probably about, I don't know, maybe like 1999 or 2000, I thought, I'm still keeping my youngest daughter in,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have to do that anymore. And so I started getting more comfortable going out. So that was just drilled into me, you know,
Yeah.
I don't want to get arrested again. I don't want to go through all that. And so, but yeah, it took a while to get past that. I think that just is something that happens to you that you just have to get over.
Yeah, I know for a long time, many homeschoolers would keep a paper next to their door with instructions like, if they come to your door, here's what you say, here's what
Yes,
you do.
don't let them
Because,
in the house. Yeah,
yeah, it
you
was
never let
a
them
real
in.
threat. And so everyone had to be prepared for how to handle that threat.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that.
So you moved to Texas, you got remarried.
Yes, uh-huh, I sure did. 1986. So the arrest was in 83. I got married in 86. And he probably didn't realize what all he was getting into. So he didn't even have kids. And he went to the homeschool book fair because he just loved the idea of it. He had heard about homeschooling from Point of View on Marlon Maddox
Mm-hmm.
radio show, and which was a great source of news
Mm-hmm.
for Christians
I
back
used
in
to
that
listen to it
day.
every
That's where,
single day.
yes, and we still listen to it. And my daughter is actually one of the hosts on Point of
I
View, which is
know.
kind of a full circle event.
It
But
is.
anyway, so he had heard about it and he was like, wow, maybe we can get a Christian school started at my little church and I'll help run it. And I want to find out all about it. So his heart was already toward that kind of thing, even
Mm-hmm.
without any children. So when we married, he was more than happy to step into the role of being part of our homeschool and just loved it, you know. And of course, he worked. but he helped at every place he could. And then with time, through different jobs and everything that he had, he was able to be more and more part of it during the day, and is still a part of home education even today.
Yeah, even when we were still kids, he would help me with certain subjects too at our house. So this is
Yeah, I
Gary.
remember him tutoring you. Yeah, I do
Yeah,
remember
Uncle
that.
Gary was my tutor for different subjects way back then in the 80s. So, how would you say, I just want to help people understand, like we talked about, you when you start, sometimes you start with a lot of structure because it's helpful, it feels normal. But obviously most people don't stay that way in their homeschool. So how did your homeschool and your ideology about homeschooling, how did that change over 28 years?
I did relax a little bit, but I'll be totally honest. I always maintained some structure
Mm-hmm.
because my personality is such that if I didn't, who knows when we would do what and when we would do it,
Mm-hmm.
that's just me. And so I needed the structure. It was good for me and it was good for my kids. We didn't have the flags and we didn't do all of that anymore. But for most of the school, we did start at the same time. We had a routine. My kids had to wake up at a certain time and have certain chores done, breakfast eaten, and then we would start school. And as the kid, I have two sets of kids basically
Mm-hmm.
because my first ones were 14 and 16 when my youngest was born. So as the first group became teenagers, there was a lot more freedom. Like I
Mm-hmm.
started discovering, learning differences. Those are things I didn't know. I thought everybody sits down at age 6 and starts reading, or
Yeah.
and that just was not the case. And so I discovered that all three of my children have different learning styles,
Mm-hmm.
and so I did learn to adjust to that. Son was great at school if he could be in a room with music playing, lay in a beanbag chair and do his work.
Mm-hmm.
He loved that. And I didn't know how he could possibly think and concentrate. And it was real hard for me to do that. But once I realized that is helping him, then we did it. He also was an oral learner. He would memorize almost everything that was on the written page if it was like read to him,
Mm-hmm.
presented to him. My next child, she was like, she's a type A
Mm-hmm.
personality. And she's like, just give me my books and show me what I need to do today. And please don't bother me. I'm going to get it done. And she
Mm-hmm.
wanted to sit at a desk, leave her alone, and she's going to knock that work out.
Mm-hmm.
So that just was so surprising to me. And then obviously we did have a lot of instruction time, but on the subjects that were independent, she loved that. My youngest daughter was a little bit of both. She loved typical instruction. She wanted to sit at her desk and we would talk about things and put it on the board, show maps, and she would read. And we just combined probably every learning style possible to her.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I did do that was different is we lived out whatever we were learning. I mean, we just did. If we're learning about colonial times, I made costumes,
Yeah.
and we're eating supper by candlelight, even though we may have cheated and cooked it in the oven. But we are dressing in old colonial clothes, and my youngest daughters especially love that. So we tried to live with that. Whatever, when we read things, we went and traveled to those places. Little
Mm-hmm.
House on the Prairie, after reading
Mm-hmm.
all the books, we went to the museum. I cried when I said, "There's Pa's fiddle,
I
and
did too.
there's Roz Shepherdess China doll."
Yes.
So, but we loved that when we learned about war, different things that happened in America.
Mm-hmm.
We went to, Fort Sumter, where the Civil War started. We went to battlefields. We just did all of that. We did reenactments. So we tried to make learning come alive for the
Mm-hmm.
kids. So it wasn't just books, but we still had a schedule. And something I learned early on, and I think it really helped me because, like I said, each of my kids had different learning styles. And anyway, I just thought, where do I want each of my children to be when they're 18?
Mm-hmm.
I knew I had no control over what career they would take, and all of that. So that was never the issue for me. But what kind of character did I want him to have? Do I want him to be kind? Do I want him to be compassionate? Do I want him to help the poor? Do I want him to know the Lord? I just thought when they turn 18 and walk out the door, what do I hope for them? And so I just worked backwards, is what I always say. I just thought these were the main things. So whatever we did, whatever we learned, I incorporated every kind of character trait into it that I could. And
Mm-hmm.
my kids will tell you I can lecture for a really long time because everything in life was a lesson to me, to
Mm-hmm.
explain how is this right and wrong. And I feel like it helped them to have critical thinking skills, to learn how to figure things out for themselves. And, with our routine in the morning, I do feel like because I didn't really have this and when I was growing up, I feel like, even just the act of, getting up and making your bed and getting your chores done and all of this, it really does something for you as far as being responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And I never was that way. And so I thrived on learning that kind of stuff. So I did incorporate that a lot. That was real important. I wasn't a drill sergeant or anything. So it wasn't as bad as it sounds, but those are just different things that I did that were probably different. It's not just wake up in the morning, sit in your desk, and raise your flag if you need help. We did pass that up pretty quick, but and in the first years, I'll be totally honest, and my kids would be honest with you too. My first couple of years, I didn't know. I thought, hey, you've got to sit down and read this book because I was reading by the time I was 4.
Right.
And so you definitely can read when you're 6. And so the learning difference was new to me. And I would be like angry. I don't think you're trying. And so I could just, I want to cry myself when I look back and think of those expectations I put, on my kids. So those are just things I had to learn with time. The main thing is consistency. I always said I could give a great talk on what not to do in homeschool because I did everything and most of it was wrong. And so, but one of the things was I would start a curriculum and a month later it's like, oh, I don't know. I think I want to start another and another. And my kids told me this, they need the same one,
Mm-hmm.
just for that year, don't start reading a bunch of different books. So that was a lesson I had to learn. And I don't know, that was something that was not good. So I said, be consistent, you know, do your schoolwork. And I don't know,
I
those are
think,
just some things.
well, I think that's important because you didn't have Instagram influencers telling you, here's what I've learned from homeschooling. You didn't
Right.
have years of other people's experiences to go on. You were one of the pioneers. And so you were learning as you went. And like you said, you didn't even graduate from high school. So you didn't even have like the experience of a full education like a lot of people do. So to me, that's one of the ways that you pioneered was forging a path that might not have even been there, learning about learning styles when back in the 80s when people weren't talking about that and why some kids read early and why some kids read late. Like a lot of that is public knowledge now, but it wasn't back then. And so
Yeah, it just
I
wasn't.
I had to learn some of that even when I started homeschooling in 2000. So and we had the homeschool conventions, like you mentioned, the homeschool book fair in Arlington, but there was still so little of a community that everyone was still new at it.
Yeah, it was
Everyone was
crazy.
learning a lot. So in 2000, you started a homeschool co-op. So why don't you tell us about that? Because that was sort of the transition period when co-ops were very new. Because, before that, you might have field trips, you might have a park day. There were ways that homeschoolers got together. In fact, when we first started, we had the monthly community meetings, and the
Yes.
dads came and we had a meal and all of that. But the community kind of started changing with co-ops. So tell us how you got inspired to start one.
Well, so my 2 oldest children are social butterflies. I mean, they love people and they love doing things. So we lived out in the country. Hardly anyone homeschooled. We didn't really know hardly any homeschoolers.
Hmm.
So it was hard on them in the early years. It really was. They felt like the oddball, and everything. And I hated that for them. So I did search for other homeschoolers and the meetings that you're talking about when they started. I think we had 6 families, and it was called Tri-County Homeschoolers. I think at one point we had 12 homeschooling
In
families.
3 counties.
We were always looking for field trips or activities. I tried to schedule, I was like the field trip coordinator.
Hmm.
And so we would have field trips once a month. We'd go to a meat locker. We'd go to
I
Mrs.
remember
Barrett's.
the meat locker.
Yes, we would go. We went to McDonald's back in the day. You could
Yeah.
get a field trip at McDonald's. They would take all the kids back in the kitchen.
Hmm.
And then when the field trip was over, everyone got a free Happy Meal. So, I mean, we had all kinds of field trips. The socialization factor really was missing. We hear about socialization, but our kids really are social for the most part. And
Hmm.
in normal homeschool, like it is nowadays, that's not an issue. In
No,
fact, I always said, I think sometimes there's too much socialization,
there's too much
but
to choose from for sure.
yes, but back then it was not that way. And like I said, with my 2 really outgoing kids, it was hard on them. They wanted friends. They didn't want to be the weirdos in town.
Hmm.
And so I did what I could, but that was it. Well, when my youngest child was ready to start, like a formal school, like at age 4, because she was ready to start and everything, I called a couple of my friends that were still homeschooling. I'd had about a 2-year gap because my kids had graduated. And my middle daughter, her last 2 years, she went to a little private Christian school down the
Hmm.
road from us. So I had my son had graduated or finished. My daughter had done 2 years in a private school. Liberty was a baby. And so now she's 4. So I reached out and called a couple of people. And one of the people I called was a friend of mine. And she said, "Oh, we've started this new thing. It's called enrichment classes." And she said, "I want you to come." So I went, took Liberty. We loved it. And when I went, I said, "This is what was missing
Hmm.
from my first homeschool. This is
Hmm.
what was missing from their school." And I just fell in love with it. And so when I was there that first year, they made an announcement in their assembly time and said, "We really need to get a couple more of these started." Our waiting list was 30 families, and they didn't have that many openings. So you might be on a waiting list for 3 or 4 years. And I said, "I'll do it." They said they would, help get me any information I needed, but they had a board of 3. So I was just going to pattern myself after them. So I knew I needed a board of 3 people. So I chose 2 of my favorite people in the world. One was my niece, Nicki. And so Nicki was computer literate. I don't know if you had a computer, a
Yeah.
typewriter, or what, but it was like, you'll make all the forms, you'll do all of that stuff for me, help me get the handbooks made. And then my dearest friend, Maggie, she was an accountant. So I asked her to be in charge of all the money, and I'll help put it together. We advertised, and back then we didn't have Facebook or anything. We didn't even have email, I don't think. And so, or if we did, I don't think we did. I don't think we got
Um,
that
I
until
think it was
closer to
it was fairly
2000.
new.
Okay.
Yeah, it was there, but not everybody was on the internet, so it wasn't
Okay.
reliable.
So I called my friend, and she said, "Well, there's a woman in charge of the phone tree." So this is how far we're going back. And I think there were 80 families on the phone tree. And I thought, oh my goodness, homeschool has grown just in,
Hmm.
10 or so years. So I told her my vision for the enrichment class and said, "Would you give me the phone numbers so that I can call people and share this with them and see if I can recruit some teachers?" And so she did. And I started calling people, and we got 32 families our first semester. My pastor's wife, she actually went with me from church to church looking for a place that would let us come and invade their building for
Hmm.
Fridays. And so we found a church, and we started our first semester, and I think it was January of 2000.
It was.
And it was great. And by the time it was ready to get ready for our next semester, we had to switch buildings to where I think you currently are now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yep.
And because we needed a larger place, and we almost doubled in families. We went from 32, I believe, to 50 families the second year. And then the years I was in, we kind of capped it off at about 62 families. We started
Mm-hmm.
finding more than that. It's kind of getting a little out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And so we averaged during the majority of those years 150 kids every semester,
Mm.
which is just amazing to me when it was hard to get six families.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but we
Yeah.
would pray over the semesters and the families, and then just regroup throughout and see what we needed to change or add and make different. And I don't even think you had a child old enough to be in it at the time.
My oldest was 3, so according to the rules now, she could not have joined then, but she
Oh, really?
she was in the preschool. But
So
yeah, it's
anyway,
still in existence today. And of course, my kids are all spread out in age. So I've been there all along, and I still have my youngest in the co op. So, and there have been other co ops come and go during that time. Sometimes people would leave ours and start another one and haven't lasted. This one has stuck around for 25 years and it's still growing. They still have a waiting list. So it was a great thing needed then, and it's still going strong now.
yeah, and I encourage people. I have encouraged them all through the years. Start one on a different day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Start one geared more toward like the arts, have band, drama, art lessons.
Yeah.
Have one on a different day of the week. If you want to focus on sciences and math, if you want one like what we have, which is kind of eclectic, with a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
everything. I just think there's so much to offer, and not everyone can go to this one thing on this day. And so I still to this day encourage people
Mm-hmm.
start one. That's
I
what
do
I did.
too.
If I felt like my kids needed something, I just started it. I didn't wait. I just said, "Hey, I'll start this."
That is a very important little piece of information right there, because still to this day, I see people saying, well, we don't have that in our area, so we can't. And I always say, you know why we have it? It's because the parents said, hey, you know what we need? Let's do this. And
Yes.
100% of the programs in our area, and this is a small rural area in North Texas. We are not the Metroplex. We have now, gosh, like 15 or 20 different opportunities in our little county. And it's all because parents said, hey, I have a great idea. And so
Yeah.
for people that always say, well, that they don't offer that in our area, I just want to go, they who? You offer it, and then you'll have
Yeah,
it in your
just
area.
step
Yeah,
out, and it's amazing.
it
And
is.
yeah,
So since 2020, obviously homeschooling has grown, and the co-ops and hybrids and specialized classes have really taken off. And so that's why now in our area, we're not the only co-op, not by a long shot. There are so many opportunities. And you and Gary have actually jumped in on that and now are serving the homeschool community in another way. So tell us what you're doing now.
well, we kind of reached the age where supposed to retire, I guess. And neither one of us just wanted to retire, and we want to do things. And so we didn't really want to just go into the, quote unquote regular workforce, but
Mhm.
we just prayed about it. And it's like you said, ever since I guess COVID, the homeschooling has changed. More people are doing it. But a lot of times both parents work and they're recruiting other people to step in and help
Mhm.
teach their children different subjects. And so I don't know. I think you had actually encouraged Gary a few years ago, and he wasn't really sure that he had anything to offer.
Wow.
But it's
He
like
does. For those listening, he has a lot to offer.
so we moved into this house 3 years ago, and it's got a lot of space, and we just felt like when we came here that the Lord was going to use it for ministry. And
Mhm.
that's what our heart's desire was. And so we were just talking, and it was like, we could actually offer a few classes here, not a
Mhm.
bunch and not a bunch of kids, but we could give it a try. That might be a way that we can still be involved with one of our passions, which is
Mhm.
homeschooling, just helping kids know about the Lord, and also be able to make a little bit of income. So we advertised, and thanks to some help from different people helping us set up a website, encouraging us, Nicki encouraged us, our youngest daughter encouraged us to go for it. So we did, and we're loving it. So we're in our second year, and we have 16 kids this year.
Mhm.
Right now, we have one big day and then two smaller days. But we'd like to have about 3 big days a week. But I figure if that's what the Lord wants, it'll come to it in time.
I think so. And now what's fun, again, we've come full circle because now my youngest daughter is taking classes at your house. And
I know. I'm so excited. I'm just so excited about that.
I am too. You've always had a gift for working with children, whether it was in church, Sunday school, children's church, vacation Bible school. You've done every single bit of it. And so I felt like this was a natural next step too, that to just keep working with kids. And I texted you yesterday, but when I took my daughter to the dentist yesterday, they always ask them about school. They said, "What's your favorite subject?" And she said, "Writing." And I was thinking, oh, that's not the one I teach. Carrie teaches her that, but that's fine. She likes it. And so, a long time ago, Gary was my tutor. And then all of my older kids, almost all of them, I think, have taken his classes at enrichment classes at some point. And now the youngest one is coming to your house. So she's taking
Yes.
her IEW lessons from you and a nature class from Gary, and it's so fun. So
Yes.
I think it's
And
great, and I think it's going to grow.
yeah, I do too. And he's loving it. Like I said, he jumped on board when we married, and even when I retired from enrichment class in 2011, he did not retire. He
No,
continued teaching every year. And so he tried a couple of other things and just thought this would be the thing for him. And he's just so happy. So he's doing world history, and he teaches government economics. He's done Texas history, and he does nature classes. So IEW and Fix It Grammar is pretty much all I'm doing.
that's good
But I
because
love it.
people want that. It's very in demand.
Hmm.
So before we close, I just want to see if you have any wisdom that you want to share with other homeschoolers, especially those. I mean, there's still so many brand new families getting started, and share with them what you would like them to know, maybe wish you had known at the very beginning.
So, wisdom. I think just remember it really doesn't have to look like anyone else's school. One of the biggest things that God taught me, especially early in my homeschool journey and even in my Christian walk, I was a single mom with kids. And I would look at other families and think, oh, they're so lucky. They have a normal family. My family is different. And, I'm not, haven't had all the education. I'd see these moms who've been to college and everything, and I just thought, man, I don't know. I feel so inferior. They all have this great, perfect life, and the Lord really showed me one day. We have no idea what goes on behind closed doors with people. Don't compare yourself. Just don't. Take where you are, what God has given you, and just enjoy it. And so, love your kids. I think the temptation, since I don't have that experience because I don't have kids now with all this computer age, but I think the temptation is to put them on a computer program as
Yeah.
far as like a school program and leave them there. That doesn't really touch their heart and their
Mhm.
palate. The things that really touch their heart, they're going to want to continue learning and doing through their life. I'll never forget this one incident. I was still focused on the books. My kids were young, and it's like we have to sit here and we have to do this at this time. And we were actually studying weather and science, and we had these big windows at our house, and a big storm was brewing. And my son got up from his chair and was looking out the window, and I'm like, Jesse, get over here. We've got to do our schoolwork. We're learning about these clouds and this weather. And he said, but Mama, look. And I'm like, you need to sit down. We've got to finish the schoolwork. And so, anyway, it was just like the Lord just stuck something in my heart, and it's like this is his schoolwork. This is what you're trying to teach him. And I was just like, oh my gosh, how could I be so blind? So I said, put the books away. And we just went and we watched the storm, and He just loved it. So that touched his heart. That lesson in the book did not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our kids aren't going to fall in love with everything that's put before them, but don't neglect the things that could touch their heart. So he has loved weather all these years. He was in Hurricane Ivan over in the Cayman Islands and was outside filming it and was literally getting blown away on the ground and fighting his way back into this house where he was staying. And I really believe it was that very beginning where he could stop his schoolwork and learn
Mm-hmm.
about the clouds. And one other instance, we used to have repair people come to our house, like you always do. And my son was so curious about all of that. And so a plumber was there and he was like, can I go watch? So I would always ask, do you mind if my son, watches you? And they were like, sure. Well, we got to know this one older guy. He was coming and laying a water line from our house across 45 acres to a barn. And so Jesse would kind of watch him outside. And one day he said, do you care if he rides on the tractor and I'll show him what we're doing? That was the way he learned best. And I said, please do. So that whole time where they were laying lines and everything, Jesse watched it. Well, his business that he started on his own was directional boring, where
Mm-hmm.
they bore these lines underground, which is why he was hired to do all the lines in the Cayman Islands. He was so good at it, and they
Mm-hmm.
wanted him to be the one. And so, would he have gone that direction in life had I not stopped and tried to take in the moments of true learning, you know?
Yeah.
And so don't get caught up. Yes, we need our books. We've got to learn lessons, but we do not have to learn every one in there to the exclusion of what's happening around us and
Mm-hmm.
seeing life and what God wants to teach us. So I would just say, be careful of just putting a kid in front of a computer. It doesn't touch their heart. And
Amen.
that's what you want to do.
So real quickly, I forgot to ask you this, but tell me what your 3 kids are doing now.
So my oldest actually lives locally right now. He's a manager in a company, and I think he's enjoying it. He has 8 grandchildren, he and his wife, and so they're loving their grandchildren. I
Mm-hmm.
think he's trying to get to where they can buy a big property and do whatever they're going to do and have it to host their kids and their grandkids. My daughter just moved to Florida a couple of months ago, and she's loving life by the beach. And she raised 2 children. She went into the Marine Corps whenever she got out of the homeschool, and I think she just did excellent. She was the only one in her platoon that never got put back. Anytime you make a mistake when you're going through
Uh-huh.
boot camp, you get put to the back of the line, and she was the only one out of the whole platoon that never got put back. So anyway, that's always been a big deal to me, but she's a beautiful person. And then our youngest daughter lives locally and is homeschooling her kids. She is a writer, a professional writer, and she's one that encouraged me to do the IEW.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, Liberty, the one you just talked about, is going to be my guest on our very next episode.
Oh,
So you'll get to hear Liberty's story growing up homeschooled, and she'll talk about what she's doing now too. Well, this has been very, very encouraging. I think everyone's going to love all that you shared, not only the history, but the encouragement to homeschool parents right now. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
well, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to my podcast today. If you want more content like this, you can go to my website at nickitruesdell.com. That's NICKITRUESDELL.com, and find me on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
You're listening to the Biblical Family Network.